Welcome to Rowena's Inn. I am the youngest of the 4 children of my parents, Charles Nelson Pretty and Rowena Pretty. I was the only one actually born at home. I'm Betty Ann Faulkner, and my maiden name was Pretty, thus the name Pretty Estates Resort. My dad actually knew about this property for a number of years because his parents had homesteaded about 2 miles up the road. So having lived in this area for many years, he learned a lot of things from the Aboriginals here. How to do a dugout canoe and how to build, well, actually he learned on his own how to do a rib canoe, and we had this great big heavy rib canoe for years. The property came up for sale from a Mrs. Jackson. Her husband had passed away, and the executor decided to sell the property, and it was an agreement with Mrs. Jackson. So my father signed the papers in January of 1924. It was a very tiny little house at the time with no running water, no facilities of any sort. And the first thing he did was put running water in from the nearby creek. Both my mom and my dad told Mrs. Jackson she could stay on here and live in the house because they were in Vancouver at that time, and just coming up on maybe for a few days at a time and working on the place and fixing it up, eventually bringing a carpenter, and he tore out some of the old structures and the walls and started extending the house to prevent big log booms from being right out in front of the house in the water there, and maybe pilings stuck here and there, and they wanted a clear view over to the mountain. So my father bought the property under the water as well, right out to what was supposed to be the middle of the channel. So that's been in the family for many years. Also, he could prevent hunters from hunting ducks here along the shoreline. My mom and dad both shared a home in Vancouver with my grandparents. And eventually, my parents did move right up here and lived on the property. And my father would be in Vancouver a lot of the time because he was a timber broker along with my grandfather at that time. At one time, they held close to 2/3 of the options on timber in BC. And he had turned this place into a dairy farm, and we had Jersey cattle and wonderful butter, you know, fresh butter. We all had to learn how to churn and make the butter, and I had a lot to do with that as well. After my father moved up here, he also started a fox fur farm. In those days, the silver-tipped fox were really in vogue, and they were shipped to Chicago, New York, and the Hudson's Bay. Actually, the Hudson's Bay, during the Depression, my father traded fox furs for goods, so that sort of cut down on expenses and whatnot. And they had the farm here. And then my father went into the logging business later on, and he was quite successful with that. So he opened up about 4 different camps at one time. And one of them had an airstrip on it. And because of that, we built an airstrip on the property here. Oh, well, I can always remember as a little girl, because I loved to go out to the barn when the men were there milking the cattle first thing very early in the morning. And I said to my mother, when can I just get up and go out on my own? She says, as soon as you learn to tie your shoelaces. So I learned to tie my shoelaces very quickly. And I would get up early in the morning and go out there. There's about 10 cats and calves, and I used to love to play with the animals. I used to have a lot of fun with them. In the summertime, I'd take a little kitten and bring it over to the garden here and lie down on the lawn and watch underneath all the flowers. The kitten playing was like a little forest. I was probably only about 4 or 5 then. After I was out of grade 3, my parents bought a beautiful big Tudor home in the Shaughnessy district of Vancouver. So I started by going to private school, and I was in private school until grade 9 when I wanted to go to public school, and some of my friends did too. In the summer times, I would have a friend up here to help out with the haying. And because my father always wanted me to drive this big old Ford truck so the men could put the hay in the back of the truck. And there'd be 2 of them out there sort of spreading it around as the big rake would pick it up down the furrows of hay. We advanced from that to a tractor that pulled a baling type of machine, and it took 2 men to run it. My father was always looking for a good deal, and he would check everything out and buy something cheaply. So my friends would just stand up there and just make sure the hay kept going around and going down into bales, and I would drive the tractor. And then we had a lot of fun at the end of the day. We would take a bar of soap and run down to the river and wash all this hay dust off us. And then on a Friday or Saturday night, we went to the local dances up at Harrison Hot Springs. And I had a lot of fun doing that. Until one night my father had lent me the car, and he had this beautiful big Cadillac. And we didn't get home till about 4 in the morning because some of our friends up at Harrison Hot Springs, one of them had his parents had a farm and in Agassiz, and that's where we went for a big party. And they were going to fry up some chicken and do all these things. And the night just passed so quickly that I didn't realize it was so late. And so there I was, driving along the highway and just about home, and my dad went by in this crummy with these men because he was going up very early in the morning to the logging, one of the logging camps to see how things were going. And my brother Charlie said, "There goes your caddy, Dad." I had my own horse, yes, and used to go riding quite a bit. And I would take my lunch and we'd go way up the road to Weaver Creek or someplace like that. And I was gone all day one time, and coming back, the horse kept looking up into the mountain area that we were going by and looking a little bit nervous. So all of a sudden the horse stopped, and I thought, what? And I looked up, and here's this huge big timber wolf, only about 15 feet away, and it had stopped, and it was looking at us, and I was looking at it, and I thought, oh, this is interesting. And it had smoky blue fur that just extended out right around it. It was just so huge, and only 3 legs. I believe it must have possibly been in a trap at one time, and they say they'll chew their leg off to escape. But so I thought, well, I'm going to go a little closer, and it had started to trot, and I thought, I'm going a little closer with the horse. And then it stopped and looked at me, and I thought, uh-oh, I better not. So it just passed on and went on out to the river. So this is just a few photographs that somebody suggested we blow up and have on the walls for guests to enjoy. This was across the river, and it was 1-room school, grades 1 to grade 8, and just 1 teacher. And this is my brother up here, my brother Ivan. He was the next one up for me, and that's myself here in the corner. This is the yacht that my father built. He designed it himself. He built part of it and also had a shipwright. This was my sister Rowena. She was the second one born in the family, and my brother Charlie, he was the firstborn, and that's a friend that's along with them. Now this is the local school teacher. Her name was Ethel Young, and Veronica Young behind her was her sister. She came to help this day because they were having a special picnic and hike for some of the school children. And this was my cousin Rolf Acton Kilby, and my brother Ivan, and Ethel Duncan. This was a large canoe that my father built, and that was my sister there, my brother Ivan, and my brother Charlie. This is my brother Charlie, my sister Rowena, my brother Ivan, and that's me sitting on that lady's knee. 3 pictures of my sister when she was little, saying grace, playing with her dolls, and up here she was May Queen at this school across the river. And my brother Charlie, and my uncle, who was my mother's brother, James Ivan Peters. This is my mother with my uncle, her brother. There was a little deer wandered in one day, and we all became quite excited because it was so tame. And that was my sister Rowena. And this is my Uncle Ivan again, and my brother Ivan. He was named after my uncle, James Ivan Pretty. This is my grandfather, and this is my grandmother, Charlotte May Pretty. This is my father, Charles Nelson Pretty, and my mother, Rowena Pretty, and my sister Rowena Pretty, who was named after my mother. And then this is my great aunt, who was a spinster and used to come out and stay with her sister, my grandmother, every year in the summer. And my uncle Finn and my aunt Ella. And here's my aunt Myrtle and my uncle Harry. And this is my brother Charlie, my cousin Rolf, my brother Ivan, and that's me and behind my grandmother. And this is my sister and I together, right in front of the bedroom that's still here. And that's me with my birthday present, a bicycle, my first bicycle. I was very excited about that. And that's my uncle and my mother together again, and a friend of my mom's, and my brother Ivan. These were my grandmother's daughter-in-laws. And there's a photo of me. And this is when my father added on to the home. This is the way it looked after. They put a wraparound veranda. So it was more or less like this as I was growing up until it got developed further. And here is Voyager the Third, my father built, and my mother sitting in a log, and it's just down in front of the inn here at that time. So this is a dining room that different ones will rent out for entertaining guests. General McCrae, who owned Highcroft, the big mansion in Shaughnessy, he used to entertain a lot of celebrities that came to Vancouver. General McCrae and his wife had this all hand-carved in Scotland and shipped over to their home. My parents went to this big estate auction that was held after General McCrae passed away. And here was this beautiful dining room suite. So they decided to bid on it. In 1939, when King George VI and the Queen came across Canada, they actually were entertained for dinner at this table. Now for guests that stay here, this is the solarium where they have breakfast in the morning. And it's very bright and cheery. As you can see, there's the skylight. My husband designed this. My husband is an architect. After I was married, my husband and I, we like to collect antiques as well. So some of my antiques that I collected through the years are here, and other antiques which I inherited after my father had passed away are all back home again. So, for instance, this table. And my parents went to England with my grandparents 2 different times in the 1920s. And my mom and dad found this wonderful high-end antique store with beautiful, beautiful antique furniture. And my father fell in love with this table. There's very intricate carvings and pattern in here, which was all hand done. All the rugs in here are Persian rugs, and they're all hand woven. We have a few silk rugs, a few silken and wool, and of course the hand-done wool rugs as well. My father told me where these 2 chairs came from originally. Very famous lord or duke or something out of their big castle or mansion. I'm not sure which it was. This fireplace was built in the early stages of the renovation of the home. My father had some very good Norwegian man that was wonderful at building fireplaces. And my father had the carpenter make this screen for my mother, and my mother did all the artwork on it. So it would be well over 100 years old now. When my parents bought it, it was just a very small home right in the center here. These were outside walls then, and there was a stairway going up in the corner to a bedroom. So my father, first thing, he had a carpenter live on the property, and he opened up the wall and built right down to the end there, and the stairway up and a few bedrooms upstairs. This was an outside wall still, which he kept that way, and built a wraparound veranda. In the middle 50s, they decided to do something different. So they tore off the veranda. They moved the whole house out from that pillar out, upstairs and down, opened up this wall, and built on this drawing room. Now, first of all, when my father built on this room, he had purchased this railing from the original Vancouver Hotel on Georgia and Granville that Mr. Eaton had had torn down. He was able to utilize quite a bit of it here and there when they built on this room, and it's all made of copper. And he also built that coffee table down there out of some of the balustrades. One of the times my parents went over with my grandparents to England in the 20s, they also purchased this chandelier that's hanging there. It was shipped over, every little crystal wrapped separately, and my parents had to reassemble it all. And this is a wonderful Steinway piano. It was built in 1912. There was one time that my brother had some friends that they all went to the Cave, to the nightclub there, because Jimmy Durante and Frankie Lane were entertaining. So my brother invited them to come up to my parents' home that evening and have a party. So Jimmy Durante played that piano and said it was the finest tone piano he'd ever played on. I loved to be up here all the time, and so did my mom and dad. So every weekend I was picked up from school and we would come up here. But I was disappointed that that was one weekend I missed this nice party with these celebrities there. And there's many fine antiques down here of Chinese carving cabinets. My father was quite partial to that, to the very well done antiques. This is when I was growing up, and probably my very early teens, or maybe even before. A cousin that lived down in the States, his mom and dad, his mother was a cousin of my father, so they would come up and stay with us sometimes. And this is my eldest brother and my sister Rowena when they were small children. This is the daughter-in-laws and my grandmother. And this is my brother Charlie. And a photograph of me wearing this funny little hat. I believe it was probably a birthday party or something like that. And this is a photograph of my sister, and her name was Rowena Charlotte Pretty. And this is a nice big spring salmon that my sister is touching there on the platter. And here is, these three pictures are of myself. My sister was the fairy godmother in Cinderella at the school when they had the play, and my sister dressed me up in it. Here is my brother Ivan and myself holding the two little dogs. This is an area for guests. We have a few games there if it's a rainy day, and has a beautiful view here of the river and the mountains. Art was something I really enjoyed, artistic things, and I was good in art in school, and never carried on with it, and then some of my friends, they liked what I did with our home, and they'd get ideas from me, and I would help them out, but I was not a real interior decorator per se, but I did help my husband out with different things. What I inherited is here. My brother also inherited, and so did my father's second wife. He remarried when he was 89 years old, a couple of years after my mother had passed away. It was wonderful growing up when I think back on it as a child, because my parents, I never ever heard them argue. And in front of us anyway. And I mentioned this to my mother one time after I had grown up. I said, I don't ever recall you and Dad ever having an argument even. And Mother said, well, we used to take it to the bedroom. They were always very much in love, you know, which I thought was wonderful, because Dad would come home from work when we were in the city home and give my mother a nice kiss and embrace, and they were just very well suited to one another. The rooms upstairs are named after the children, except for this room, which we just put my mother's nickname on. Her name was Peters when she was growing up, and she had a friend called Pat, and the teachers started calling them Pete and Pat. Somehow that nickname stayed with my mother, and all her friends started calling her Pete. It was when she was quite elderly. She would sometimes come up here and sleep so that she wouldn't disturb my father in the middle of the night if she was reading a book or something. And I always, in the back of my mind, thought about how lovely to have French doors. It was sort of a romantic idea, French doors opening onto a terrace and that sort of thing. So I explained all this to my husband, and so he drew everything up for me. French doors, which were all different sizes being an old home. Then the pillars as well. That allowed us to have a balcony up here as well for two of the bedrooms. And I had the railings all hand forged over in Chilliwack, and these were dormer windows up until about 8 years ago is when we did all this. And my husband kept the same design and made them into dormer doors. Yes, this is Charlie's bedroom. This is another area for guests to enjoy. We have instant boiling water so they can make a cup of tea, and coffee's brought up here at 8 o'clock in the morning, and the guests just come out and help themselves. When my father added on and pushed the whole house out, it was just a little sitting area for guests that were up here staying. So this is Ivan's room. He was a pilot with the CP Airlines. He was probably one of the youngest pilots that it had ever had. This was my room, and this was Dame Nellie Melba's bed. My parents were over in the 1920s to London, England. I believe the last time they were over was 1928, and that's when Dame Nellie Melba's bed came up for auction. This bed was shipped over, and it was in my parents' room for many years, right up until my father passed away. And it was also the bed that I was born in. My mother said because I was the only one born at home, this had to be my bed after they'd passed on. And so I thought, well, this would be good to have up in my old bedroom. After my father passed away in 1992 at 102, my brother Ivan and myself went into turning the old home into an inn, and we opened in June of 1995, and everything refurbished but put back the way it was. So then we carried on from there and built 4 cabins and opened those about 96, 97, 2 more, 97, 98. So we have 4 altogether, and they're very, very popular because they're so cozy and nice and you're totally on your own there. And they love the fact that there's no TV in the cabins. That was something that we worried about to begin with. Should we put TVs in the cabins or not? But it all seemed so, nice not to have that. Sort of the automatic thing you do. You walk into a room and you put the TV on. But here, husbands and wives get to know each other again, and they all say, oh, it was wonderful you don't have TVs here. So the cabins are very popular. People have their own space there. It's your own sort of getaway then. You're not associated with rooms right beside you and whatnot. And then there's others that love to be in the inn because all the antiques, and they like the feel of that old English mansion. But also the rooms in the inn are very, very nice too, in a different aspect. They have the antique look that goes with the home here. We have many weddings here, weddings and different events, maybe corporate retreats, all that sort of thing. And they can use the dining room table here as well, and the lower floor for dinner parties. If someone has an anniversary, they want to have a dinner party, and it works out very well. We have our own personal eagle nest right up the highest Douglas fir tree, I think, on the property. The eagles really picked quite a view. And so I had these cameras put up there. David Hancock, who is what I call the guru of eagles, he's studied them for about 50, 60 years, right from Alaska down through British Columbia, down into the States, and gives lectures all over. So that's quite interesting. And he went up the tree. We had to get in a 200-foot crane because he says this is the highest nest he has ever seen. It's 175 feet high up this huge Douglas, and the Douglas tree itself is about 220 feet high. So when the eagles are not in the nests, these cameras, which they're high definition and can do a 360-degree turnabout, gives a wonderful view of everything, the mountain across, the part of the golf course, and so it's quite interesting. Generally the last week of February or the first week of March is when the eagles lay their eggs. And you can watch this on your internet and see the parents in there. They both take turns sitting on the eggs and bringing food for each other. It's all so very interesting. They stand up and turn the eggs every now and again, and it's really something to see. And then incubation time is about 35 days, and the little eaglets are born. Generally there's 2 eggs, occasionally 3. So it's interesting to watch all that as well. The river is wonderful for fishing. We have such a run of sockeye salmon, coho, chum, spring, all the different species. As I mentioned before about the airstrip here, it's a 2,100-foot airstrip and plenty long enough for people with small planes to come in. And this is just what they do. It's a perfect destination. Different people come in, flying their plane in, and we've had as many as one time I counted at least 10 planes parked down there off the runway. The runway runs right alongside number 17 fairway, but it is a free drop for the golfers if they hit a crooked shot and it goes out that way. My brother passed away in 2001, and it took me till 2004 to buy out his 50%. At one time I thought I would have to sell the place, and that was quite devastating because I felt, you know, this place really needed to stay in the family, and I was the only one born at home and things like that. So I felt this was special, really special to me. After I took over in 2004, we built the River's Edge restaurant and the pro shop and the administration building. And of course my husband Douglas, he did all the designing of it, and with a little input from me, but but anyway, I did the interior design of the restaurant and all the paneling, tiles and the fireplace, all that sort of thing. And another chap that was into the business, he designed the bar in the restaurant. I'm very happy that so many people are able to enjoy it, and they have thanked me so many times, and I really appreciate that because you know that they're being genuine. And I just say, well, thank you for coming, you know, because it is a pleasure. Hopefully my children will carry it on. My nephew as well. One of my sister's sons is the general manager here. It was my parents' wish that it stayed in the family. We also get a lot of pleasure having the guests enjoy it, and I quite enjoy the fact that they really like the place, and they it's a real enchanting getaway for them, and so many feel quite relaxed when they come down the driveway. Their cares melt away.